Yo, hey guys, hope you're doing well. So today I'm going to be breaking down Running Out of Time for you guys. I'm really excited, so yeah, let's just jump into it. And in terms of how I'm going to do this, I'm probably going to go just chronologically in terms of track order. So I'll go from, analyzing the drums, the processing of that, and then moving on to the sound sources, bass, instruments, and so on. And then, yeah, we'll just go through that and see what happens. The current project that I have up right now on screen is a older version because my latest one has everything kind of flattened into audio files. The mix isn't as great in this one, so just bear with me. But most of the content and ideas and sounds are all in here, so yeah, right, let's get to it. So in terms of drums, we have the kick and snare and some additional auxiliary stuff within the actual track. And so that consists of a couple samples. One of them is a boom bap kick that I found on Think Splice. And what I've done is that I've just kind of like rolled off the attack so it's soft but still punchy. We also have a hip-hop trap clap, and then also my snare that I designed in Serum, rim shots, ghost kind of snares. And so in terms of the processing, this is usually how I do all of my drums is I have this one rack that I put in here. When I start a song, this is automatically loaded up in my template. And so it's basically three things: a drum bus with the drive kind of cranked up, and then we also have this Wolf compressor, which is very subtle, and then also this RC20, which is giving it some more saturation, and I don't know what you call it, but it's giving artifacts to the higher frequencies of the drums, which is kind of counterintuitive because later on you'll find out that, I actually I don't know why I do this, but I end up like duplicating the kick and snare channel and then re-add in like harmonic distortion to brighten up the high end. It's very odd. Like the way I do things doesn't make sense all the time, but for me it sounds good and I don't think I need to change it that much, and that's just kind of how I've been producing stuff ever since like I moved to Ableton, so I haven't really changed that. And in terms of the percussion, we have this separate group, and one of the most important parts about this percussion group is that it's being sidechained by the kick through this plugin by Shaperbox, just so it leaves room for the kick and snare whenever they come through, and it also glues everything together as well. In terms of the hi-hats, we have these two short hi-hats, which are one of my favorites. I use it all the time. And then we also have this Barely Alive open hi-hat, which I got from Splice. In terms of processing, yeah, just rolling up the low end, giving it some compression with OTT, limiting. And I think what you'll notice is that for a lot of the drums and stuff, I put limiters, and on this as well, I put a compressor. So it squashes everything down and keeps everything at a consistent volume throughout the cell. And then following that, we have this M&M cylinder sound that I recorded through my Zoom mic. Yeah. So this next one is also another sound that I recorded off my Zoom mic. It's this machine winding sound, which actually came from my mum's like cassette tape player. The original sample sounds like this. Yeah, so it kind of had issues loading cassettes. So I've just taken that winding sound and made that instead into like a sweep up to a clap or a snare. And so in the context, it sounds like this. And then, yeah, that's basically it for that. We also have, in the final section, the finals drop, we have these kind of offbeat stereo white noise samples, which I made just by stacking two separate white noise audio samples, panned left and right individually. And then next up, we have a buckle kick that has been reversed. Its main purpose is to give energy and momentum into the second beat, which has the clap, because the first beat of the first drop and second drops are basically fake outs. And then so next up we also have this as well, just another sweep up, to the claps and kicks and stuff. But yeah, the most important point I'm trying to get across here, I guess, is the fact that 90% of these kind of small auxiliary sounds, the machine winding sounds, for example, are there just for ear candy and to give dimension and interest to the track when people are listening to it. And that's basically it for the drums. I mean, I usually put a lot more small elements and small percussive things in my other tracks. But in this case, because there's so much stuff that's already happening in the drops and vocals and, etc., I decided to keep things as simple as I can. Now let's move on to the sound sources. So right off the bat, for the first track of this group, we're going to talk about one of my favorite synths in this song. It's this one. Yeah, dude, I love this thing so much. It's like one of my favorite things I've ever made. And yeah, I'll just show you how I made this one. This whole concept of the synth was taken from AU5 in his one of his like tutorials of like how he makes his super saws, and the way he does it that's different from everyone else is that instead of getting like a normal synth like Serum for example and then just like maxing out the voices and then turning up the detune, the way that AU5 did it instead was that he kept everything in unison. However, he used the chaos knob, and in this case the chaos knob was modulating the coarse pitch of the oscillators, and so the result of this is that the chaos knobs, rather erratic and very, very fast changing values, ultimately make the perceived pitch of the oscillators more grainy and therefore a bit more fuller sounding in some areas. But yeah, that's kind of why I love this synth sound so much, is because it has such a like unique character to it, and I think it really fits the kind of vibe that I was trying to go for in this track. And then in order to support this synth, I have a couple more layers that are kind of doing the same thing, just in different registers and textures. The first layer that we have is this one, which is just a bounced out version of the gritty synth that we just looked at. And in this case, this one's acting as a carrier for some of the other synths that we'll hear. As an example, this carrier sample is being combined texturally with this string patch that I have through the plugin Morph. And in this case, this plugin, what it does is that it basically just combines the textural timbre of two different sounds, and you can kind of just change the character with that XY pad in the middle. That of course has some automation on it. It's got utility, kind of bringing it a really, really quick spike, and then, you know, this echo and so on. And that's to give the main chords some impact. And that's also supported by this. Yep, so that's basically just giving the high-end frequencies that this top synth doesn't really have. And then this is the really cool part. This is what I really, really liked about this when I made it, was that because Diptych revolves around the idea and the concept of water, which is meant to be the thematic opposite of air in Tableau, I've used it as like a textural layer for the synths. There's a couple things to note about this, especially in the processing. Now, first off, I use a frequency shifter to kind of bring the pitch up and down with the waves kind of crashing in and out. And then secondly, I have this utility that I'm modulating the width of, and it changes throughout the song. So for example, it starts off at 100% and then it increases in the drop because there's so much stuff that's happening in the foreground. So I have to push things to the side. Following that, we have this, which is just these really, really small, you know, twinkly synth things. Yeah, and that's made out of just this Juno emulator, Taluno LX, you know, with like the frequency turned down, with the chorus up, and some reverb. Following that, we have this little thing. Yeah, so there's always like these kind of like small ear candy stuff that I put in. It's very, very subtle. You can barely hear this, but if you wear headphones and you're sitting in a very quiet place and you're like purposefully listening in for these kind of small details, you'll hear it. And that's just got a bunch of effects like disperser, little altar boy, gem dopamine, and also morph as well, which I think this is being this audio sample, as mentioned before. And then following that, we have this little like kind of RP thing, and it pans left and right depending on if it's going up or down. Okay, next up we have the drop synths. So in this case, we have multiple different things happening. The main stab that you hear, that thing is made out of 3 different layers. First one is this. Oh man, it sounds so sick. I completely forgot how cool it sounds by itself. Sorry. And then so, yeah, that's the top layer. And then we have this layer below that, which is like, oh man, it's just so like fat and like gritty and so mean. I love it. And so those two combined give you that like low end grit to the main synth. So those two, I can just show you how that's made. That's just made by this pretty simple patch, to be honest. It's like 3 different oscillators. One of them is a square wave, up an octave, some saws, yeah, basic shapes, just this sine wave. The thing is though, a lot of EDM producers, like especially the ones that I follow anyways, like a lot of their sound design doesn't come from the synths itself, but it comes more from the actual post-processing that they do. So in here we have a peak at around 200 hertz to kind of push the lower mids of the actual synth sound. Then we have this custom effect rack that I've made that it consists of multiple different distortion and effect plugins. And in this case, I've used it to give a more metallic and saturated sound. And then here's what's interesting about it is that I've also used a hybrid reverb to give that bass sound some more resonance. And the way I've done it is that I've taken this E major 9 synth sample that I've bounced out from Serum and then put it back in this hybrid reverb. And then on top of that, we have this final third layer, which is just outlining the harmony along with the two bass synths. On top of that, we have just some more effects, retro color, which is only doing stuff at the very end. And then we have Redux, which is giving it that kind of big crushy sound. And that's basically it for the main stab anyways. Next up, we have this, which is a stack of orchestral instruments and some other synths. And that's made out of 4 things. So yeah, it's just a glockenspiel. And then this as well, this is another synth, which is made from this sawtooth that's pitched down from really high to really low really, really quickly, and then fed through a convolver as mentioned before. That's basically the same thing, but just supporting the high end of that. And that synth is pretty simple. It just sounds like a low-pass sawtooth, and that's just supporting the tonal body of the sound. And the one thing I've done differently with this synth layer is that every alternating version of this that plays during the drop, I've actually shifted the very last note just a bit earlier without locking it to any sort of grid or rhythm. I did it entirely by feel, just to get a bit of rhythmic contrast and interest during the drops. Following that, we have this little growl, which is just bounced out from a sound design session that I've made. And then fed through some effects, as mentioned before, from my rack. And then the second time through in the drop is just the reverse version of it. Yeah. Following that, we have this, which is a stack of 6 different plugins. We have this one, which is just Bartok Pitts strings, which is just flutes. We also have a Celeste. Then for the last hit as well, we have these 3, which is just the same instruments, I think, but down a fourth. You might have noticed, like, the reason why these kind of orchestral instruments sound a bit weird is because I've got a disperser on it at full amount, which kind of gives it that elasticy, rubbery, almost artificial sound to it. And then we have these. Yeah, some growl, some classic kind of dubsteppy virtual riot style stuff, which I made in a sound design session. And then on top of that, I also have this one, which is using Morph again. I'm blending this sample with these orchestral instruments. We also have this, which is for the second drop. There is this as well. Let's move on. We have this, which is one of the cooler parts of the track, and I really, really love making this one. Sorry, the audio is kind of cutting up. Like, my CPU really can't handle this, but you kind of get the gist of it. This is made out of 3 different Serum patches. This first one is a... So this is kind of the same thing as that this other one that I showed you guys. But in this case, what I've done is that I've actually modulated the LFO, or the rate of which how fast this sound occurs, and what I've done is that I've automated it so that it slows down, which gives it that sound, which yeah, it sounds really, really cool. This took multiple tries to get right because I wanted to make sure that the rate lined up perfectly with the hit of the next stab. And then we have this one, which is kind of the mids of that sound. This one is... This is the low mids. So yeah, we have the highs, the high mids, I guess, the low mids, and then this, which is just white noise for some more brightness. And then in terms of processing, it's kind of the same as everything else before here. The most important part is that there is a convolver reverb where I've used one of my own kind of convolver samples to affect these Serum sounds in the same way as the other ones, basically. And then, yeah, that's basically it for the synths. This is probably one of the most simple sound source sections or sound source groups that I've had in any track, basically, because in this case, I really, really tried to be as concise as possible, just to make sure that, like, every synth that is in here is doing only what it's absolutely necessary. And yeah, that's about it for that. Okay, so that's the end of the sound sources. The following one is the bass. So here's what's interesting about this. Just quick context. The whole thing began on the OP1. So I was just messing around making a beat. But yeah, the bass line initially originated from me just playing it in on the OP1 and recording it down. that basically makes up the main groove of the bass line. And to support that, we have this sub bass. And then following that, we have this, which is just, it's kind of like low mids. It's not really a bass, but it's only there to support the chords of this. Yeah, that's basically it for the bass. So after that, we have the instruments, and this includes this guitar, which is just this classic kind of bossa nova style. And I played this twice and panned it left and right individually. Following that, we have these, which is just some high-end chords. The post-processing for that, I've got this custom piano rack that I've made. I call it Fat Piano over the PH, and it's got like some compressors, a exciter, rolling up the low ends, and so on. And I put that on most of my piano audio samples, anyways, that I record in through my Nord. Yeah, and following that, we have this, which is just, I don't know, this cheeky little octave kind of jumpy thing, which is actually me trying to pay homage to Bassy, because I don't know if some of you have noticed, but my producer tag is basically this, that kind of thing. Yeah, and so I've taken that and kind of expanded it so that it actually becomes part of the song as well. It becomes a rhythmic element and also like a, textual thing. Following that, we have this. So this is the main driving synth that kind of propels everything forward as the track goes along. This is made out of 4 layers. The first one is this, which is just a completely dry signal from the OP1, from its like, I don't know what's called, but it's the string synth. And then following that, we have this, which is just pitched up an octave. And then we have this one, which is playing the 5th. And then altogether, it sounds like this. And so that is what's the driving force behind the entire track. And then finally, we have the 4th layer, which is this one, which sounds like this. And that is like, I used some of the effects on the OP1 and also its gyroscope to record this. So what I was doing is that I had like the delay effect on, and then I used the gyroscope within the OP1 to modulate the delay. And so whenever I just like kind of moved the OP1 around and tilted it and stuff, it changed the delay amount. And that's why it has that really cool, like ever so changing delay. Like you can hear it here, especially. And so that's basically it for that. Following that, we have the vocals. And so usually for vocals, I'll do multiple layers. For example, I'll do 2 in my falsetto voice, up an octave, and then maybe a couple in my chest voice, and then some in harmonies, and overall it just stacks up to a bunch of different layers that all contribute to the sound. The most important part for all my vocals, and I do this for all my vocals, including my previous tracks, like all the songs from my EP Tableau and also in this EP as well, Diptych, I have this vocal chain that I use on everything, and that consists of multiple different things. First off, it's an EQ that rolls off the low ends. We have a compressor. Usually there's actually 3 compressors, but I'll turn them on and off depending on what sound I'm looking for. OTT, another EQ just in case. And then we have Sooth 2, which is de-essing, some reverb, and Gem Dopamine, which is, in this case, an exciter to bring the brightness of my voice without the nasally tone, which I've cut out previously, and an auto-tune. In hindsight, I really should have put this first, but yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, I don't think there's too much to talk about here. It's just a lot of layering, panning things left and right, especially when they're higher in register, when I'm singing falsetto. In this section, I've recorded this maybe 4 times in 4 different layers, 2 of them being panned slightly left and right, 2 in the middle, and then also these whisper tracks as well. Why you gotta be salacious? To bring in some more air. And that's it for that. So here's the most interesting part. It's the vocals in the drop. So I've chopped up my vocals and kind of reused it in the drop as like a main element. So that's just me singing Got Me Running Outta, but chopped up and being fed through a lot of effects. This one is a trick that I've been using ever since that Alan Walker remix I did like years ago. It's basically, you know, the same idea as that morph thing, but instead of that, I've also added in the vocoder, which is just this really, really low E being played by this serum synth, but then fed through this vocal, and that gives it more texture. And then yeah, that's basically it for that section. For the drop, we have just my vocals chopped all over the place. Because my main influences for this track were Skrillex and Noise's track Supersonic, and this also goes for many other EDM tracks as well, there's so much interesting effects that are always being applied to the vocals, and so in this case I try to implement that into my own arrangement. And yeah, that's basically it for that. Now we move on to the effects. In this first channel of the effects group, we have this kind of glitch fall sound, which I made in another sound session. And that's at the ends of the drops to, yeah, as a transition kind of thing. Yeah, I've recently started doing this where I've added my breaths in as like a rhythmic texture, and removing the low end and stuff. Following that, we have, as I mentioned, the kick and snare, but only the high end. So as you can hear, it's only the high end because my stupid ass, my stupid drum processing, completely removes all that high end. So I have to re-add it in. But yeah, anyways, that's that. If you wanted to know how I do that, even though I kind of recommend you not do what I'm doing with this kind of drum processing because it's really a hassle. But yeah, I just cut up all the low end, add like gem domain 100% and like, you know, isotope trash to bring in more of the high end. Yeah, and that's basically it. Next up we have this, which is just some noise sweeps. And then the interesting thing here is, which continues on my conversation about things only sounding when it's absolutely necessary. In this case, the noise here actually plays along with the chopped up samples of the vocals and synths. And here it actually plays in rhythm with everything else. So everything sounds as clean as possible, because when I produce stuff, it's like I always end up overproducing, and so at the end of it, I always have to end up cutting so much stuff just to make sure that it actually sounds decent. And in this case, for running out of time, I was like, okay, I'm gonna just try from the get-go to make everything as clean as possible. And yeah, this is kind of an example of what I had to do to make sure that things were very precise and accurate and clean. Yeah, following that, we have the water, which is, as mentioned previously, how water is a main motif in my songs. We have this, just some water samples that I've recorded from the nearby river. All right, so now I'm back here with the latest project file. Let's go through the extra stuff I've added in effects. First off, you know, there's some more sweeps, including these like white noise things. I guess in my older version, I didn't think it was bright enough, so I had to add in some more white noise to fill up the higher frequencies. Okay, so here's kind of the cool stuff I added in afterwards. So I took some inspiration from Jacob Collier when he did his tracks, and how he adds the sound effects of whatever's being described in his lyrics. So in this case, you know, I'll be talking about all night, and so these crickets just start playing in the background. I know some other examples include this cash register that opens up when the phrase loving always comes with fees. And also, you know, I like a little bit of bite. There's a dog barking in the background. Yeah, just those kind of things. I don't know. I really enjoy adding them in because it's almost like cartoony. It gives it a bit of that like playful vibe. There's also this ticking clock. You know, just extra rhythmic textual stuff. And it also is a important thematic idea that I will come back to in my later projects. The whole idea of like time and stuff. And then finally, we have this 1 bar break where you hear all these water samples. Because this EP diptych evolves around the concept of water and submersion, as opposed to Tableau's more airy sound, the use of the water sounds in this pre-drop was done for cohesion with the rest of the tracks in diptych. I guess some final closing thoughts. This track out of the Diptych EP, this was probably the latest track that I finished producing. So this one has definitely the most refined bits and pieces and the most up to date to what I sound like as of now. Yeah, this was a lot of fun to do. I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you have any other questions about this that you want to talk about, please let me know in the comments. I'll definitely look into them and try to answer the best that I can. Thank you guys so much. If you haven't heard Diptych yet, it's out on Spotify, out on all streaming platforms. All right, all the best, and see you guys.